So I really think that the idea is to understand your financials more than anything. I think that's going to be the key, because when you start talking to people that are going to want to back you, they're going to want to know that you know what you're talking about. It's great that you know your idea. It's great that you have passion for your idea, but if you don't understand the long-term effects of what you're doing, if you don't understand the business that you're in, if you don't understand like those basic ideas, then no one's really going to want to, provide you with money, because they're not going to trust you with it. So
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7 and 8 figure businesses, as well as the CEO and founder of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com and we're always here to help. Now, today we have another great guest on the podcast, John Reimer. And John began his journey as a systems engineer, taking systems engineering class at West Point when he was, or I think was had to define the 21st century. Got into environmental science degree, and his interests are always kind of switching away from gunpowdered weapons to other alternatives. And we'll get into a little bit of what he's doing today in that regards. Then he graduated from West Point and went to Fort Campbell for a period of time and went into the infantry, went to Iraq, served there for a bit, came back, got out of the military, worked for National Science or National Center for Research for a period of time. And then where he got to legally grow marijuana. So that's always an interesting one. And then a buddy called up and it indicated that there was a good opportunity. I think it was in Stevens Transport, but you can correct me where I'm wrong. Went to work for oil and gas for a period of time, and then today is pursuing a prototype that he's been working on for quite a while that moves us away from guns using powdered weapons to an alternative, and he'll dive into that. So, with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, John.
no, thanks, Evan. I appreciate it so very much. Yeah, it's been quite the journey for sure.
All good journeys are. So I walked through kind of just as a quick high level overview of kind of what your journey's at, but take us back a little bit in time to when you were at West Point and studying and kind of how your journey got started there.
Yeah, so we had a class, and the basic, general project for that class was designing something for the 21st century warrior. And my classmates had all sorts of different ideas, and ended up not picking this one thing. I think I picked reactive armor or something like that, and don't quite remember the whole story. But the idea that I gained from this class really kind of has stuck with me for the past 30 years as I date myself here and what I've done. But the idea is that how can we go from using gunpowdered weapons to what will be the next generation of future weapons platforms for the military moving forward. And always been something that people have stayed away from, just simply because the technology hasn't always been there, or the ideas just never kind of like came to fruition, or there's always been other things to do. I mean, to be honest with you, when you look at the military industrial complex, the manufacturing of ammunition is $1 billion business, and there's no reason to stop it unless there's something better that comes along. And so I think that that's really kind of where I started, was that how can we transform this industry the way that not only do we hunt, we wage war, we do the things that we need to do in order to kind of like move forward, right? And I think that with the introduction of the Space Force, you're not going to be able to use gunpowdered weapons in space. So how would you be able to defend the galaxy from Star Wars movie or Star Trek or whatever? But yeah, I mean, that's really kind of where this kind of idea came from, was that as we move forward and put ourselves in position to, explore the world, put people on the moon, like what are we going to do? I mean, is there a need to defend ourselves? What are we going to do? And so this idea just has been brewing in my head for 30 years. I think
So
the
now
exact
let's
is like
dive into
27.
because 30 years is a long time to jump over. So you went to West Point, you kind of got this
Right.
introduction. You did the class, you kind of graduated, kind of had this idea of percolating about how you might, transition away, what that might do. but then you put that aside, so to speak, or put that down for a period of time and went to Fort Campbell, went in the infantry, and then went
Yep.
to Iraq. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so really just kind of just set it on the side and, just kind of let it percolate in my brain. And I think that that's one of the major lessons when it comes to the way that I process information is sometimes you just got to be patient. And I think that this idea has been just sitting in the back of my head for that period of time. And I've learned a lot of things in my experiences, whether it's been, in the military itself, actually how we run operations, what soldiers are looking for, what are the expectations of their weapons platforms, what do they want done. I think those are some lessons that I can take with me that I learned to be able to apply to this situation. Because to be honest with you, soldiers are picky, especially when it comes to their weapons, and they want them a specific way. They want them to operate all the time, and they don't want to fiddle with messes. And they want to be able to, as they say, reach out and touch somebody whenever they want. And I think that that's kind of what I bring to part of the table, and being able to really kind of put something together that's going to be a quality platform for, not only soldiers, but hunters. I mean, I hunt. So it's just one of those things that you really just kind of sit back and you open up your gun closet or wherever you're at, and you go, is there really something better that's out there? And what would it look like? And I really
Now,
think that's kind of where it started.
so now diving into that, so you were or served in Iraq, you kind of get that experience, and you got the understanding of kind of what whether soldiers are hunting or what people that use guns on a regular basis would want, and kind of let that idea percolate. So now you came back from serving a tour in Iraq, and kind of where did you go from there, and kind of what
Yeah,
was
so it was just really working and putting the money together. And that's really just been kind of where I'm at. So along the way, I worked for the National Center for Natural Products Research. I grew marijuana. It was the only legal marijuana field in the United States at the time, and that was actually a really cool job. Basically, what we did was that we took non-native species of plants, and the pharmacologists were trying to develop them into usable drugs for the pharmaceutical industry. So it was really fun. It was exciting, but I wasn't able to make
just
the
out of
cash that
curiosity,
I
so
needed.
how did you initially get into a job where you basically grow marijuana or legally grow marijuana? There are plenty of people.
Yeah, so it was a weird thing. So
How
I
did
was
you get
actually
into
at
it?
Ole Miss to EA, and the job had kind of just opened up. And my mom's a botanist. My degree's in environmental science, so I really kind of had the background of being able to grow things, a kind of a green thumb. I got my own greenhouse in the back right now. There's no marijuana in it, just for anybody to know. But yeah, I just went out and saw the head horticulturist, and he was like, "You're hired." I mean, I
Hmm.
kind of could walk through the place and say, this is what we need to do. I originally just started like repotting plants and watering them, and over the course of about 3 years, I kind of grew into the head horticulturist once they realized that I did know what I was talking about, and that kind of started on that pathway to work through all that, you know, like pharmacology, government, kind of rigmarole, right? I mean, there were so many regulations and rules for what we were going to cut. We used roots, we used flowering plants, we used seeds just to develop different things. And it's weird how stuff like this can develop, because on a Russian licorice plant, there's this super sticky stuff on the outside of the seed pod. And that is actually what they reverse engineered to create the sticky substance on the back of Post-it notes. So it's weird stuff like that that really kind of just kind of put you in a position to go, this is really cool
So
stuff.
now you did that for a few years, and then what made you decide or to get out of that, or kind of where did you go after you grew marijuana for a few years?
Yeah, well, it was not the cash crop that everybody thought it was at the time. So, in being able to kind of like take my invention to the next steps and go from really kind of what was in my head to putting it down on blueprints, I needed, some basically money. And at that time, right, I got a call from a friend of mine that was like, "Hey, we have some room in the transportation, logistics, supply chain industry, and do you want to join?" And I was like, "Sure, why not?" It was going to basically double my salary, and I was going to be able to do the work that I in order to kind of further what my actual goals were, and that was kind of like getting this idea into reality. And so I've done that for the past 15 years. I ended up working with my friend, and then we started working in the oil and gas industry, and that's really just been kind of what I've done, just kind of working my way up the scale, director level in supply chain world, but always taking that time to the side and say, hey, I can work on this on the, I can off time. And everybody has been super patient in being able to deal with my mad scientist ravings. My kids get annoyed when I start talking about electromagnetic fields and beams and things like that. They're just like, they just start shaking their head and walk away. So
Mm. So no, I think that definitely, is a fun journey to take. Now, as you're going along, so you take the journey, you kind of get going on that, and you've done now the military, you've got into growing marijuana, you've got into oil and gas. Now, how did that, get into oil and gas with a friend, and then, always kind of percolating in the back of your head, hey, I've got this project, I want to do this, and kind of this is where I'm at. Now, how did that transition to kind of where you're at today? I mean, so did you or work through other jobs? Is this your full-time gig? Is this a side gig? Which I always say side gig is really just a second full-time job because it takes
yeah.
as much time, but kind of bring us up to a little bit to where you're at today.
Yeah, so right now it is still a second full-time job that I do. So I'm actually hoping that October 2021, my full-time gig. That's my goal date to be able to make sure everything launches off. But that period of time was really spent in this journey of being able to go. I mean, I had to teach electrical engineering. I had to teach myself about materials engineering. I had to research all these articles, and that was a lot of what I was doing in that journey to get to where I am. And that was really kind of why it has been a side gig for so long, of being able to just really make sure that what I'm putting together is going to be something that's going to actually work. Historically, this type of idea has existed for, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 years. People have put different things together. And so I really kind of wanted to learn from their mistakes, kind of understand where their limitations were. How could I push the envelope? What would be the things that would allow me to be able to, create what I created? And that's kind of where I'm at. And so hoping that like October will be the end date. That's what I'm telling the family, is that October I'll be free and clear and be able to do this full time. And they're kind of excited for me, and I'm excited for myself. So
No, that definitely is exciting. Kind of fun to dream about it, so to speak. Fun to kind of think where we see where things were going to go out, but then to actually have the rubber, so to speak, hit the road and start to actually pursue it and to go after it and bring it to reality. Always make or gives it a or much realer feel. So that's certainly exciting. So well, that kind of brings us to where you're at today, and so now we'll transition as we kind of talked about, how you got to, or what your journey is, how you got to where you're at today, and a little bit of where things were headed out in the future. We'll jump to the two questions I always ask at the end of each podcast. So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what did you learn from it?
the worst business decision that I ever made was not trusting and verifying the people that I'm working with. Especially with what I'm doing, being able to talk to people about what I'm doing, and getting their feedback. There have been some people along the way that I presented this idea to them and said, "What do you think?" And I mean, they were real quick to shoot it down. Really kind of like put that negative energy in there, and you just kind of put you in a position of going, "Man, that's not a good place to be." You start questioning yourself. You kind of pushed me back maybe a year and a half, to be honest with you. And then the other people that I talked to were, "Hey, this is a great." Come to find out, they're doing something on the side that they're trying to take from you. So it's been a little bit of that. So I've really just been hard to trust anybody with what I've got going on, because it is something that's completely different and unique. And I really just kind of want to keep it close to my vest as much as I possibly can. So, the important stuff I've been able to, but There have been people along the way where I've had to, cut ties with and just say, God, that was a horrible decision. It just put me on a bad path, negative energy. And I think the best business decision that I made is just to be patient. I could have, rushed this out, about 4.5 years ago and put myself in a position to where actually the actual design that I had didn't work. And it wouldn't have worked the way that I would have wanted it to. It was not going to be something that was going to be viable in a long-term situation. But I put myself where I had like really just kind of shot off really quickly and then faded away. And I appreciate the idea that, you know, I took time to make sure that everything was right, dotted my I's, crossed my T's, really just kind of looked at it and said, you know what, even if it takes me, 5 or 10 more years, that's going to be okay because it's going to be the quality that I want and that I think people expect.
No, I think that is definitely, kind of a mistake to make along the journey, but also a great one to learn. So it sounds like, and figuring out who to trust and how to trust and what not to trust and all of that is also always, I think, a something that people have to figure out along the way because it is hard. Who do you tell, who do you share it with, who's going to be on your team, and who's going to say that's a great idea, I'll run with it, or I think I can do it even better. And so I think that that's always, a great lesson learned along your journey. So now we'll jump to the second question, which is if you're talking to someone that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Ooh, there's so many to give someone. So I really think that the idea is to understand your financials more than anything. I think that's going to be the key because when you start talking to people that are going to want to back you, they're going to want to know that you know what you're talking about. It's great that you know your idea. It's great that you have passion for your idea, but if you don't understand the long-term effects of what you're doing, if you don't understand the business that you're in, if you don't understand like those basic ideas, then no one's really going to want to provide you with money because they're not going to trust you with it. So I've been fortunate enough to get some help along the way, and really, to be honest with you, convincing my family and friends give me a little bit of cash here and there has always been difficult, simply because there was kind of an expectation that they thought on their end that it was just a request from a friend and I didn't have to provide them with important information like financials. And so being able to sit down with them and kind of like throw out a 5-year plan and say, this is where I'm going, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I expect. And I think they're very appreciative of that, being that open with what your financials look like and not trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes and saying I need X amount of money for this shell or for Y component or anything like that. I think that that's been always helpful in being able to say I'm going to spend this money and it's always going to be earmarked for someone, for something.
No, and I like that you hit on there a little bit of, kind of being open and transparent because I think that too oftentimes we want to overinflate it, we want to make it sound better than it is so that it entices people. And most of the time, all that does is set it up for failure because then you have unrealistic expectation. It's no longer, hey, this is the time frame. It's here's a risk. It's kind of, oh, we're all going to be millionaires in 12 months, and it's like that's
Right.
probably, for most businesses, it's not the case. And contrary to what you see on TV or Shark Tank or the movies, it's not that quick of growth. And so to say, hey, here's realistically where we're at, what we think the potential is, where it's going to be headed, and then even being a bit conservative, such that then when you either hit or meet or exceed expectations, or you're on expectations, or that they've at least been properly set. So I think that's definitely some great advice. Well, just as a reminder before we wrap up this episode, for all of you that are all the audience, we are doing the bonus selection. We'll talk a little bit about intellectual property. So if you want to hear that answer, stay tuned and listen to John's top intellectual property question. Otherwise, as we wrap up, thank you again for John for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell, feel free to go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the podcast. Two more things as a listener. One, make sure to click subscribe in your podcast player so you know when all of our awesome episodes come out. And two, leave us a review so other people can find out about all of our awesome episodes. Last but not least, if you ever need help with patents, trademarks, or anything else, feel free to go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. So now with that, now as we've wrapped up the normal portion of the episode, it's always kind of a fun one that we get to switch gears a bit, and you get to ask the question and I get to answer it as opposed to how the normal episode goes. So with that, I'll turn it over to you to ask your number one intellectual property question.
Yeah. So what is the best way to choose between being able to put your intellectual property on a delay? Because I forget the terminology and you'll know it. So you can either put it on a delay for a year or just go ahead and, bite the bullet and just put it in the patent office day one. I mean, where do you decide on that?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're basically, is looking or referring to a provisional patent application.
Correct. The
And just for
provisional
the
patent. Correct. Yep. That's the one.
Yeah, so and just for the listening audience, basically a provisional patent application is one where you can submit it. It saves your or gives you date of invention, kind of saves your place in line for up to a year while you're going out or while you decide what you want to do. So and I just to reiterate your question now with that background, I think the question is when should you go for a provisional and when should you get that 1 year placeholder versus when should you just go for the full patent application. So I usually answer this question with the kind of the opposite of what or when would you go or when would you go for a provisional patent application if you don't fall into those camps. Then I'd recommend going in for a non-provisional or the full patent application that will get examined. So with a provisional placeholder, there are usually kind of two reasons why you do it. One is for budgetary reasons, and that's saying, hey, I got a cool idea, I've got a great invention, I need a bit more time to save up the budget to be able to afford the full thing, but I'd like to get something in place while I wait such that I don't have, an issue where somebody else comes along and takes the idea. So that's kind of one motivation or reason that you're saying, okay, if I don't have the budget today, but I'd like to get something in place, I'll do the less expensive provisional patent application so I have a year within which to save up for it. Another reason, I guess I said two, but there's probably more three. Another reason is if you're not sure how the marketplace is going. In other words, you're saying, hey, I think this is a good idea. I think it's worthwhile. I'd like to take a little bit of time to explore the marketplace, test it out, see if it's worthwhile to invest before I go after the full one. So even if you have the budget, you may say, hey, I'm not convinced of the marketplace, so I'm going to do the placeholder first and see how the market accepts it. The third reason is if you're saying, hey, what we're doing is we've got a really cool idea. We're doing a lot of innovation, a lot of testing, and a lot of development, but I'm not, while we're not having I don't know that we've landed on the finalized or the full design, the first design that we wanted to go to marketplace. But on the other hand, we've created a lot of cool things, and we don't want somebody to come along and see all the work that we've done and copy it. So while we're continuing to do that R&D and getting kind of that first generation product, we'll save it, we'll do a provisional, and then we'll come back to the non-provisional within that year and give us a bit more time to fully flesh out the R&D. So those are kind of the three main reasons why I would do a provisional. Usually if it doesn't fall into one of those camps, then I would say I'd go for a non-provisional in the sense that let's get a fully fleshed out application. It's one where it will have greater weight for investors or for people who want to acquire it or license it or anything else. And then it also gets the process going for examination so you can get a determination as a patentability and get some more insight there. So that's a little bit of how I weigh it. It's always a bit of a balancing. It depends on your circumstance and your situation, but it gives you a bit of insight. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up the podcast. And now, if you, John, or anybody in the audience ever has any other questions about intellectual property, feel free to grab some time with me. Just go to strategymeeting.com. We're always happy to chat and always happy to strategize and help with your intellectual property. With that, thank you again, John, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thanks, Devin. I appreciate it.